Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cocktails and Rocktails with me, your most notorious groupie, Alice Rouse, and author of We've Got Tonight, The Life and Times of Notorious Groupie, and these other books right here, where you can get that, my merchandise, Patreon, everything. Go down in that description, fiddle about. Check it all out, because there's some cool stuff happening down below. So I've been told. Anyway, thank you guys for everybody who's coming here, who's hanging out, who I'm creating these amazing friendships, who's helping me create this awesome community, not just with your presence, but with your ideas, your suggestions, your questions, everything. Thank you guys so much for everything you put into this channel. It does truly mean the world to me. And speaking of truly meaning the world to me, my book has really meant a lot to me, and I know people, they don't always read everything in my book, and a lot of people ask me, you know, what happened after Vegas? Life. That's what happened. So today we are going to be doing a reading from the book. And this one, you guys, is my awesome cover by my friend Mark. This is a collector's item if you have this cover, because as you know, I do change the cover. I just am getting ready because I've tweaked a few things on the new cover that I've posted on my social media. So that's coming as well. But this one, my favorite. Really love it. And like I said, it's the paperback, so you know it's going to be a book from the reading. And because we're just doing a cool little reading today, I'm just going to have some Baileys, because I love Baileys. So everybody, grab whatever you'd like, whatever makes you comfy, kick up your heels, and let's have a little Cocktails and Rocktails story time. Cheers, big ears. Love my Baileys. People don't realize it's still whiskey. It may be creamy, but it's still whiskey. Has that kick. I love it. And like I said, today we're going to do a reading from the book. And because I want people to really read and look at the last chapter, because there's pictures. You want to know what happened after I left Vegas? It's right there. But in all fairness, I don't go past a certain point in my life. I kind of cut off my groupie experience after John, because, I mean, my life didn't change. You know, one of the other groupies that we used to hang out with that was a good friend of Marie's, and then of Danny's as well, who lives down in Florida. And when that happened, she asked Danny, she was like, well, is Allison going to quit going backstage now? And Danny was like, oh God, hell no. If anything, this will just keep her going, because, you know, it's a whole different world for her now. So that was kind of the thing that, yeah, because like I said, it's the only world I know. It's a comfort zone for me. It's where I feel safe, comfortable, content, allowed to be myself, not judged, and just an old friend. We all want to be that with somebody. So, all right. And if you guys want to see the picture, when you're reading my book on the ebook, I do get paid for it, but only if you read it from first page to the very last. So, if you want to go see the pictures, go check this out. Go read the last pages as well as the first. And everything in between, because there's all kinds of cool stuff. And it's only half the story. I know some people, when they've read the book, have been like, great book, but is it real? Is it true? Yes, this is true. Everything in here is true. Everything in here I did. I lived. I experienced. I instigated. And I escaped from whatever. This is my life. Like I said, it's not even half the story. But I understand, because, you know, every groupie story that's been in the past has been so limited to a very specific 2, maybe 3 years, and just one or two big names of rock stars, maybe 3 or 4, you know. So even with like Sable Starr or Lori Maddox and stuff, so to have someone that has this kind of volume, that's because, you know what, the 80s is not represented. And this is how all of us groupies in the 80s were. We took it to the hilt, and we lived it longer, because we were women who were of a different mind frame, and we didn't need to get married until we were older, we were focusing on career, and we worked hard and we played hard. But yeah, so I can see why, because previous groupie stories are so limited that it's hard to really fathom how us 80s ladies lived it. And it wasn't just me and my friends. In fact, I'm getting ready to interview Desiree from Texas. She's got a lot of good stories. She's a couple years older than me, hung around a lot of really awesome bands. But those are her stories to tell and you guys to tune into later. So, but yeah, that's why, because society is not used to having groupies with this volume, this many years, you know, a few decades. They're only used to a few years, not a few decades. So, yeah, my life kept going, but let's go ahead and let's get into the reading. All right. So this is, I'm going to do the last two because they're just a few pages. I kind of broke them up, and I probably should have made them one big chapter. So this is chapter 20, Behind Blue Eyes, 2003 and beyond. So after all that, where does a groupie go? A few places while you try and run from the reality of it all. Mostly backstage and a little on the road. Because if you stay on the road, you can outrun the reality of normal life, right? No. I should have known that it catches up to us all out there in the musical caravans. Maybe just briefly, but it is always hovering over your shoulder like a little kid trying to get the last golden ticket. While my reality sat on my shoulder like a cheeky monkey, I chose to only see the golden ticket that had been in my hand all these years. I wasn't ready for the reality thing to happen. I had been ignoring it most of my life, so why invite it over for tea now? After being abroad with one of my newest rocker lovers, I eventually went back to Salt Lake City and my regular ways. I was coming full circle. The city that had been in a long, dusty sleep and needed some good groupie awakening. I relivened the former debaucherous capital just a tiny bit and fell into old habits a couple times with Metallica. James and I accidentally ran into each other outside the hotel bar and instinctively flitted towards each other. He and I saw our old selves briefly in that 5 minutes of catching up. I told the boys of my intentions to do this book, thinking that James and Lars would try and shut it down as they had many other things over the years. But quite the opposite. They, along with a few of their longtime roadies, applauded and welcomed the chance to find out the rest of my story. This ought to be good, Lars said. Now we can find out if it was true or rumors. And that was the general consensus. I felt a sense of relief, and for the times I was around, the old sense of family I had once enjoyed with my generation's biggest rockers. Ooh, time to flip the page. Hold on. As you can tell, I'm not always good at flipping the page. All right. I surprised Vincent Paul one last time with his new band Damage Plan as it rolled through Salt Lake City. I walked down the stairs at the club they were playing and sat in the tiny dressing room catching up with Vin as he mixed my friend and I drinks. I looked at his face when I told him why I left Las Vegas and said it all. Vinnie's illusion of him being my only rock and roll lover was deflated with one little sentence. We've talked about this before. But he still didn't leave my side all night, even when some groupie wannabe in Frankenstein groupie boots tried to woo him away, no matter what. Although Vin and I had naturally floated away from our lover's port, he still had the loyalty to the memory of it. Sometime that night, Vincent Paul's brother Dime chatted me up and wondered what the hell I was doing in Salt Lake City. He was used to me being with his brother in Las Vegas. He also lauded the years Vin and I had fallen into bed together. Dime said Vinnie was always lit up when I came around and left a days-long glow when we parted ways. I know I did. Vin had left it on my answering machine many times. You made my day and you made my way. Can't wait to see you again, was his usual greeting. Dime didn't understand why he and I never really got together. Because, as he said, in some way, I reminded him of their mother, and Vin adored his mama. So, ooh, okay, that freaked me out for a second. That was so Freudian. I laughed and shrugged it off his suggestion of his brother and I being an actual couple. Vincent Paul came over and broke up Diamond Eye's conversation. Daryl and I hugged a final goodbye. It was May 2004. In about 6 months, my lover's brother, along with a couple of other damage planned family members, would be heinously destroyed by some psychopath called Nathan Gale as they began their set. So you see, guys, I mean, this is, like I always say, rock and roll is not always so pretty. It's not always rainbows, kittens, and me hanging on the arm walking to the stage. You know, because like I said, a lot of groupie books are very, very limited. Not just in their era, not just in the bands that they hung out with, but in their perspective. And having over 3 decades, my perspective was very different because I went through all these up and downs with the rockers. Not after I hung out with them did they go through this stuff, but while I was hanging out with them. So rock and roll's not always pretty. Gotta wipe it off your mouth sometimes. All right. Sometime after that, when Vin came back from his tragedies aftermath, he reformed his rock and roll energy. We just talked about this. Yeah, he put his rock and roll energy into the ever so lame band Hell Yeah, because I never liked him. I didn't like Hell Yeah. It just wasn't the same, and neither was Vin's heart and soul for the music. Rightfully so. I stopped by one of the tours to let Vin know about this book. I thought he would have been welcoming, much the same as all of our other metal friends had been. But he was cold and angry instead. He threatened me with lawyers, which you've all seen that. I've talked about this in one of the other Vinnie's episodes. So I've put the email conversation on that episode. Go check it out. He threatened me with lawyers and slammed the proverbial door shut. I, in turn, scoffed at the threat and reminded him of the book he had just written about his years as Dime's brother. Hypocrite. Vin was still alive when I wrote this, so I didn't write this in scathing. I wrote this because this is how I was feeling. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to put these guys on a pedestal. We have fights. And at this point, 17 years into my rock and roll life, 18 years in 2003, this is what was going on. Because things end. But in the end, I will always remember the good he and I shared with respect and fondness. Plus, I have one thing no other groupie ever did. I will always have the ever so sacred Vincent Paul. That rests in my hands. Because nobody else was allowed to call him that outside of his mama. Well, that, and I also have the furry purse he bought me, which was stolen when I had my storage unit broken into. Stole a bunch of my purses, and the one Vin gave me was one of them that was stolen and all that. So I went on about my life as normal and spent more time in denial and hanging out with the likes of Cypress Hill, Ministry, Korn, U2, Snow Patrol, and Nickelback. Nickelback only because my lifelong friend Oris was their FOH. As we know, we've met Oris here. I went fabulously about my rock and roll fantasy and in new, audacious formation and ignored the reality breathing down my neck. But its breath caught up with me when I tried applying for jobs. It was there as I realized I had been spending money like I was still making it. The reality set in when I went to Borders and read music mags while enjoying a Sunday morning hot chalky. Music rag after rag spread the slander that I was a hooker. They attacked me, calling me a murderer. They blamed me for the cocaine I didn't have anything to do with. It never ended. How could it? Not only had I been involved in the ultimate rock star death, but The Who suddenly took up touring again and recording as well. The never-ending ceasing attention of that one night cost me my sanity in the end, and I fell off the backstage pedal I had been standing definitely on for so long. Oh, defiantly. Yeah, I fell right into my lawyer's office and took action. When I chose to go after Roger Daltrey for several interviews in which he called me a hooker, I hit below the belt when notifying him of my intentions. The Who was going to be back. The Who was out on another tour and going to be playing in Salt Lake City during this jaunt. This was a really big deal. The band had not played behind the Zion curtain since the 70s at Lagoon, this tiny little amusement park here in Salt Lake City. That's where they played. It was probably $5 and $10 a ticket, if that. So, me, being the bitch that I was, I told my lawyer I wanted the Shire-dwelling mouth jockey served before he got to my metropolis. Oddly enough, and even more ironic, the place they were able to serve him was minutes before the Who's show in Las Vegas. True story. The band flew into Salt Lake City a few days later. Irony. I'm sure Roger thought quite a lot about whether or not this groupie would find her way to their backstage doors, and I was going to, because I was still working for The Who. And he was going to have me come backstage. Not after that, though. Not after that. Do you blame him? So, needless to say, I didn't go backstage to that tour. I almost did, as I had plenty of friends working on that tour and could have rubbed salt in the wound, much as he had been in mine. But as much fun as it would have been to taunt the situation, I stayed away. Roger settled the suit immediately and without question and instructed his lawyer, as instructed by his lawyer. I'm sure he also found out his mistake from mutual rock and roll friends, as many have me in common in one way or another. 6 degrees of separation when it comes to groupiedom. But even after all the fighting I did to clear my name and take back my rock and roll reputation, I was still in denial that I was affected mentally and emotionally from the reality of John. What it was coming down to is that the reality sat on my shoulder clear as day for some time to come, flashing like a strobe light in my memory. The rigor and lividity, the room full of cops, the calls from tabloids, and all the running away I had done since the aftermath. The real world invaded my private little rock and roll fantasy and tore a hole in it for the whole world to poke at. It became a whole different ballgame, because when you go through something like that, not just the reality of waking up to a man who's in full lividity and full rigor mortis, there's plenty mentally, emotionally that you need to deal with. I don't care who you are or who it was. And then add the tabloids on top of it. And I had always been so private. I was so happy just living in the private rock and roll world my whole life. Nobody knew who I was on the outer world, even though the whole rock world knew who me and my friends were. I didn't give a fuck about the public. I gave a fuck about my social circle, my friends, the boys. So for this to just invade my life it came down on me like a ton of weights. But I also had to deal with the fact that I had to deal with the press and take the brunt of everything that John had done that I had nothing to do with. So this is this whole domino effect that, a lot of people will never get, like I talked about in a previous episode about being isolated. The real world, blah, 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 blah. And in the end, I had to stop and lick my wounds, even make some new ones, only to discover I didn't belong in the real world. I tried and failed miserably, every attempt sadder than the last. And it's true. I try. Where do I belong in this world? I don't know. I belong with rock and roll, but my world's bigger than just that, For me. But how does a girl with a public past survive out there anyway? You don't. The only place I ever felt right, ever felt safe, was behind that little steel gate in the protective world of rock and roll. I spent the next several years in silence with a pinch of nervous breakdown thrown in. Only venturing out for the tours I had a history with. That one night of my rock and roll life preceded me in the backstage hallways. I was getting wary of being that girl, because when walking backstage to these new band tours, I may have friends working on them, with sweet, fruity scent of scandal wafting gently behind you seems a very noticeable and heavy burden to be lugging around. Because I was always just Alice into the Rock Boys. But the new rock boys were like, oh my God, that's her. She was the chick that was with him when he died. So that was, and when I was writing the book, it was all still very fresh. It was several years down the line, but it was all still very fresh and very much happening. The new guys tried to starfuck their way towards my Black Widow web, only to be usually met with the bite of death. I was still angry and annoyed with the slanderous things that I had been called, and fighting any thought of someone getting close to me, because I suddenly questioned their motives, just the same as many rockers do other groupies. But they never questioned me, not even now. Now with the newfound rock and roll hierarchy that I now held, and take that loosely, because I am, whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, a part of rock and roll history. And when I say hierarchy, it does become a different existence when you are with someone in that caliber. When you're dragged through the tabloids, the guys look at you like you really get it now. Even though you were there for me through all the stuff, all the things that I went through, you get it 100% now. So it was a different understanding of each other, and a different seeing me in a different light, you know. So don't take that as I'm being self-righteous, because I'm not. And don't be mad at me if I call myself pretty, or I know my place in rock and roll, because other girls call themselves golden groupies, or, you know, the queen of the groupies, stuff like that. And it's not true. It's all labels. And they do it because they have to fluff themselves up. But, so, I slept with, okay. I knew I always held. I waltzed through the backstage doors with the same popularized notoriety most of the rockers I had slept with did. I was a new kind of groupie entity, one that no other groupie from my time had become. Old groupies that were still bitter from back in the day used me to try and re-grab the brass ring of groupie glory. Cammy. That's what I meant by that, honestly. Yeah. She had been telling all kinds of lies, but we already talked about that as well. But it was long gone and rusted out, sitting in my little box of odd rock star objects that only I understood. I backed off and ventured into only familiar territories where I knew I could just be Allison. No sidekick, no girls who always ended up jealous and angry. And we're talking the Trudys, the Susans, that's Lisa Susan, whatever her name was. With my boys, I could relax in the middle of all my hazy aftermath and just be the girl they knew from back in the day. At one time or another, I had grown with them, laughed with them, and been part of it all, right alongside them, if not a little bit underneath them. In another shocking reality, however, I was weary of it all. Backstage wasn't my drug anymore. I didn't need it to define who I was, because I knew at this time it was defining me, and it would forever put me in that cage of defined. Even though I owned me outright, even though I've always owned who I am, I knew society would define me, and that would lock me in. Backstage had long since become my home, my proverbial parents' house, where we tend to go after devastating moments in our lives. As usual, it was there to coddle me and protect me from the outside world. But we all have to leave our parents' home sooner or later. Although we do come back for regular visits. I do still hang out with rock and roll, as you guys know. You've seen Horace, you've heard me talk about it. I still have my friends, but I don't need to go to the shows like I used to. I don't need to be a part of that side of the life. I just want to be part of my friend's life. Go out to dinner with my friends. Do things I never get to do with friends on a normal basis, because they all just want to go hang out with bands. Well, the bands, all they want to do is go to dinner and have a normal night. So that's kind of what I do. I don't need to rush to every show. I want to rush to every hotel bar the night before that I feel like. So, okay, and this is chapter 21, What Happened to Jane, after an LA Guns song. So, and before I start this, a lot of people know I practiced a lot of different religions in my life. I studied different countries, different religions, different societies, different beliefs, stuff like that. So I did practice Islam, Sufism for a lot of years. After having been in the Middle East, it piqued my interest, and I don't believe in any organized religion now. I believe in God, but I don't believe in any religion because they're all fucked. So, with that said, in most sects of Islam, including Sufism, the one I used to practice, it is believed that we all have a set path in our individual life. No matter how hard we try to follow the sidetracks and break away, God will yank us right back to where He meant for us to go. I tried for several years to deviate and believe what other people told me, that I had to let go of my childish ways and hang up my backstage boots in order to move forward. It was a struggle for me to hear, but in my broken soul, I tried to make it true. I took on normal jobs and therapy thinking it would help me walk away. It did the exact opposite. Trying to fit into the normal world only broke my spirit and stole my laughter. Not only to mention most of my real friends were part of the rock world in one way or another. How was I supposed to leave them behind when they were the only friends that brightened my darkest days like a lighthouse in the blackest nights? I couldn't. I wasn't meant to. The internal struggle inside myself the internal war struggled inside myself long enough for me to realize I had no need to believe anyone else's ideas or opinion. I hadn't followed anyone's advice ever in my life before. Why start now? It hit me in 2003 when I walked into the side entrance of the Marriott Hotel downtown Salt Lake City to meet an old-time rock and roll friend. I had just returned to the ghost town of Groupie past and had not hearkened this lobby for more than a decade. Last time I was crossing this hotel's main floor, I was still a young girl with everything ahead of me. Every memory of every band I stumbled across the carpet with came rushing back to me and warmed me to what had been left a cold breeze. It almost took me to my knees in the severity of its happy weight. I walked slowly, wondering if they would try to have security come after me all these years later. If you know, you know. If you know, you read the book. If those old Polaroids of Danny and I were still posted around the back halls, if Metallica would still be in the lobby bar. But of course they weren't. Not even my friend was there. Apparently there was now another Marriott a few blocks away. The band was now down the road. Huh. Even after all these years, band still didn't darken the front desk. The groupies were long gone, and so was the greatest backstage scene in rock and roll history. Was the time I checked out. For me, rock and roll is like Hotel California. I can check out any time I want, but I can never leave. I am now and forever part of its wild and wondrous soul. I stood in the vastness of the Marriott's lobby and let my memory swarm with parties past for a few minutes, remembering what the place used to look like, how big our hair was, and how we got away with crossing all kinds of borders with being less than legal age. I probably slept in more of the hotel rooms than I cared to count. I could hear the laughter and, "Hey, little girl," like it was yesterday. But that was the thing. It was yesterday and so long ago. And it was time for me to go. I had another rocker to meet and a revered reputation to live up to. I exited the side door without a care and never looked back, because once I walk away, I don't look back. While I will always be a part of rock and roll and love it dearly, I realized I needed something bigger. I mean, let's face it, I am a part of its notorious history. I can click my ruby slippers all I want. There is no getting out of Oz for me. I am part of Vegas's sexy past and forever tangled up with the Who, and now, well, someone once said I'm the Jackie O of rock and roll, its beloved last lady. I will always have my backstage friends and mingle with them along the way until we are all ass up in the ground. I am in it for life like that. But maybe it is time to make it the dessert on the buffet that has been my existence. It is okay to skip dessert, but okay to indulge from time to time as well. After all, it's rock and roll. It has more than satisfied my sweet tooth through the decades. As I asked in the beginning of the last chapter, after an adventure like this, where do I go next? Well, the best way to answer that is to put it like this. Someone once asked me what my greatest adventure was. I knew that they meant an actual rock and roll one, but one story alone could never convey the true adventure, what the true adventure really was. It was love. My love for the music took me here. My love for the camaraderie and gypsy wanderings kept me interested. My love for some of the men, the lucky and rare few, who may or may not know who you are. In any event, the real great adventure in any life is just love, and we express it in many different ways. This was my expression of the love I chose as my adventure. Was it conventional? Oh, hell no! But I never really was in the first place. And what did I get for all my love? For all the wild times, backstage passes, plane tickets, great shows, bar tabs, and lost panties? I got my own little nook somewhere in the middle of its twisted and beautiful history and family. That and a few songs written about me. I will always be part of its soul, just as it will always be a part of my heart. I will always know rock and roll is there, near or far. My boys, my rock and roll. We made that pact in another life to come back and do it all over again. And oh man, did we ever do it better than before. And with that, I leave you for my next great adventure. That's that. So that's the end of my book, guys. So let me explain to you that we did it in the past life. And Tuesday, today, is the 21st anniversary of John's passing. John always said, like his friends in Zeppelin, the Beatles, all those guys, everybody in the bands of his time, he said we were all pirates in a past life. And we made a pact to come back and do it better in this one. And they all became rock stars, and their wenches became groupies. So I think we did it way better than we did in the last lifetime. So that's where that comes from. And for the people who have said all of a sudden the last 2 chapters are just great writing, she probably didn't write it. Every single word of this book, from the first to that very last, is all me. May not be a great Stephen King novel or Anne Rice or, Yeats or Keats poetry, but it's rock and roll, and it's the truth. And there was mine. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, all right? Hope you guys kind of enjoy being able to actually look in and hear me reading it and kind of hear what was going on and how I'm really intending it to be said and not to be interpreted. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for everybody sitting around listening especially to the whole episode, because I know, and every YouTuber, it's like this. Not everybody listens to the whole episode, so thank you. If you've been here with me from beginning to end, you fucking rock. And if you read my book from beginning to end, even more. Thank you so much. And for those of you just lurking, come down, comment, say hello, introduce yourselves, subscribe if you don't want to, because you can hide your subscriptions, and I don't know everybody that's on here, because some people do, even though I'd like to know everybody on here. So come and join the community, introduce yourself, say hello, go down, hit the like, hit the share, hit my bells. We'll see you next time on Cocktails and Rocktails. Cheers.